Okay, welcome back to the podcast on the future of business and technology. I'm Bernard Ma, and today I'm joined by Leanne Allen, who is a partner at KPMG, to explore the critical intersection of AI innovation and trust. As organizations rapidly deploy AI systems across industries, we'll discuss why responsible implementation is not just an ethical choice, but a business imperative. Leanne will share insights from KPMG's trusted AI framework, practical approaches to human-centric design, and how values-driven AI can help organizations navigate potential ethical pitfalls while maximizing growth opportunities. And whether you are developing, implementing, or governing AI systems, this conversation offers valuable perspectives on building technology that earns and maintains trust. Leanne, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Bernard.
So lovely to have you with me. So what is the promise of AI in terms of driving growth, and why do we need trust and responsible use?
I think we're already there in the AI era, right? So, most organisations have already started the journey, and therefore already starting to realise some of that value. And the initial value is very much around productivity and efficiency gains, and that could be personal productivity tooling, so like the Microsoft Copilots approach. Or it could be new particular systems or platforms to allow you to really focus on particular functional or domain specific areas where you're driving that efficiency. But that's really driving efficiency in existing processes as they currently stand today. So do what you do today, but do it better, faster in that respect. However, and naturally, obviously, that's driving growth from a productivity point of view. But the other angle, of course, is how we really want to make sure that we're transforming by using AI and driving that level of adoption. So although it promises all of these amazing value and amazing gains, unless people start actually using these tools and not just using them in a very infancy side as like a bit of chat here and there, but actually using to the full potential, you're not going to drive that growth promise that's being made, or the wider value for the organisation. And that's where trust comes in, right? So most of the challenges to the barriers of adoption are driven by this trust challenge, and trust can be take a few different forms, right? So the colleagues yourself, do they trust in the tools that they're using? Some of that could be driven by their fear of their jobs, like evil AI is going to go and take over my job, so why do I want to actually engage and use this? And then there's trust with your customers and consumers. And then, of course, there's trust with the regulators. So you've got to think about trust from the wider stakeholder group. And a way we can get around, around trust, you do have to consider it from the different stakeholders. But that is effectively the use of responsible AI. If we get responsible AI right, and that's everything from all the way from the design aspects, early ideation stages, really understanding what you're trying to achieve. Does the purpose feel right? And that's where the ethics can come in. So just because you can do it technically, should you really be doing that thing with that data and AI in that way? So really focusing on the use case or the purpose that you're deploying AI, all the way through to the sourcing of the data, and then the build of the models, and actually then use through to the outcomes. So the monitoring of these solutions, is there any model drift that's going on, and the decisions that are being made off the back of those. So actually, responsible AI takes a full end-to-end life cycle approach to that. And if we get that part right, then that can actually drive that level of trust. Okay, again, focusing across the different stakeholders.
Yeah, I like this, that you take a full stakeholder perspective on this, because you're absolutely right. If employees don't trust it and they're scared of it, they won't want to use it. If customers don't trust us, there's so many different layers of trust. It's not only will the tool potentially replace me, but also is the tool reliable? Does it generate the kind of responses I want? I'd love to dive deeper into the workplace. You talked about people potentially being scared. So, how will AI reshape roles and how we work, and why is trust so important in that context?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. And again, I mentioned for the first part of it. So when we think about AI adoption, and certainly in the workplace, as let's say that I started off already mentioning the first phase, we actually call them waves. So the first wave is very much what we call an enabler wave. So it's retooling. It's giving you access to tools to help you do your job a bit better and faster. That's wave one. Wave two is then looking at the actual end-to-end processes themselves, and
Mm,
effectively it's the redesign of that process. So now that you've got the tools at your disposal, would you do the process in the same way you should do it today? Probably not in a lot of cases. So it's a full redesign. And of course that needs employees who are doing those jobs to be actually not just reskilled on the technologies and AI, but actually how they're going to operate in a new world, because
mm,
their process will change. So actually it's a change of business process, not just a technology change as well. So that's wave two. And again, many organizations are already starting that wave two journey. And then wave three is a bit further out, but that's actually reimagining. So that's really thinking about um, even even your organizational structure, going back to what is your value stream of your organization, what's your actual ultimate purpose, and how do your functions need to operate to solve that common purpose. And that may be even, do you even need your separated siloed functions? Do some of these end up merging together? And one of those areas, as an example, is in the compliance line. You think about a future world where you could end up using AI to have continuous monitoring, so of AI itself, right, or any other type of models. So once you've got that continuous monitoring in place and alerting systems, then what's the role of your second line of defense, so your compliance teams? That's going to change because most of these controls are going to be baked into your first line already. And then what's that mean for internal audits of organizations and how their role then changes? So you can understand actually that this can completely shift the entire operating model in some respects or some parts of a firm. Um, so that's typically how roles are trained. But more importantly, the focus on augmenting is still the buzzword of the year rather than automating. So yes, there will be naturally some roles that can be, or some tasks, should we say, within roles that can be fully automated. But anything that requires decision making is still about augmenting humans, supporting humans, providing them extra information so they can make better decisions rather than making those decisions directly themselves. And I think that's really the shape of what the workforce of the future is going to look like. It will free up time for more critical thinking, more value, more creative type work, as time goes on. Um, so the good news is that that means some of the more administrative, slightly duller parts of your day job will be able to be supported and taken away in some respects, sort of freeing your time up to do more interesting work.
Yeah, fascinating, and so many opportunities for business, so much potential change for individuals, for their skill set, for what they do, and what work will actually look like in the future. So, bringing this back to trust, then, what are the key things that responsible AI or trust are enabling or hindering in organizations?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. And I said there's a few different lenses of how we need to, or should we say, the barriers to adoption that relate back to trust and responsible AI. And first of all, we can take the human lens first of all, and the human lens is very much based on the training. So AI literacy, if you want to call it that. And it doesn't mean every single person has to know the in-depth understanding of how an AI works. That's not what we're talking about. It's more just broadly, do you understand where these tools are good, what the limitations are, do you understand the risks associated, and how you can more practically manage those risks.
Mm.
So there's an educational part, and that's not just on employees on the ground, that goes right from the board level as well, because the board need to make some of these decisions across organisations about how they're going to be using AI and how they're going to be managing the risks around the use of AI. And more, of course, when I'm using the phrase AI, I am typically referring to generative AI as well. In that context, because more traditional AI has been around for many years. So from a people point of view, it's very much around that educational piece and culture change. And on the culture change piece, it's a little bit more subtle and slightly harder to achieve, and that's a mindset that we're probably not used to as many of our workforce, and that's continuous innovation. So pushing the boundaries, trying these things out, understanding that you're possibly going to fail a few times before you figure out how it's really good. And we need to drive that level of adoption through that lens of innovation. So that's, again, those two things are really focusing on people. Then you've got the actual technologies themselves, and yes, everyone is concerned around, well, these tools hallucinate. So generative AI, that's what it does by nature, right? So and therefore by nature, it's really hard. They're like black boxes. We don't really understand how they work. How do we really attest that the content they've generated is accurate, in simple terms? Well, thankfully, the good news is that AI can actually help you now, almost like a QC and an audit bot, if you want to call it that, to help the humans be more comfortable with the output that's being generated. But it's not fail-safe, and we can't expect these tools to be 100%. And that's something that's, again, from an educational point, we need to come together almost as a community to accept we can't be pushing for 100% accuracy. Humans are not 100% accurate. Why should we expect these tools to be 100% accurate? So again, there's a blend of the actual challenges with, say, hallucinations, accuracy, naturally bias is often discussed, and of course there's bias across the life cycle. Again, there's bias in historical data, there's bias in data limitations. And what I mean by the limitations is that the data sets that the AI is being trained on is not necessarily representative of the population that you're trying to deploy it over. It might not be very good at picking up, as say, the common ones, accents, as an example of use of some of these tools. So how do we solve for that, and how do we mitigate some of those challenges? And again, there's solutions out there that can help. Some of those are synthetic data solutions. Some of them are just purely cleansing type solutions. But the importance is the ongoing monitoring to ensure that you're testing and challenging for bias or potential biased outcomes, and reverting back with feedback loops. So there's some
Yeah.
technical challenges, and then there's some people challenges.
Very good. And yeah, I very much agree. And sometimes I work with executive teams and they've almost given up on generative AI because they've tried it a few times and then it hallucinated and they think, okay, we can't use this because we operate in a regulated environment, or we're in a high stake environment where we can't use this. But these systems are getting so much better, hallucinations becoming much less. And then, as you say, you can use AI to double check your answers. And usually it's extremely rare that you get two AIs getting it wrong. And then with the bias, I think synthetic data is super exciting to potentially create those more balanced data sets that you need to reflect the world you want to you want the AI to be trained on.
Yeah,
So
and actually on that point, there's some newer technologies, companies that are coming out that are starting to combine things like quantum compute with AI to really solve some of the fundamental bigger challenges around the more imagery side, as well as tech side. But imagery, so the deep fakes that we know are that are hitting the world, and certainly on social media by storm. But equally, they have a really impactful in terms of phishing attempts, as we've seen deep fake videos. Yeah, I think it was even earlier this week, or maybe late last week. But anyway, there was a YouTube incident. So there was a deep fake of a video of the CEO hitting the community of creators, effectively trying to fish for their credentials, and they had to catch that one quite fast. So this stuff is happening real time, all the time, by the bad actors, sadly, in the market as well.
yeah, and this is, I mean, we're talking about trust. That I think this is a huge challenge for AI, that we now have so many AI capabilities that allow people to really easily create deep fakes, be this video, voiced images, and they do get shared very widely on social media, and we haven't got the systems really to catch them. And yeah, and I'm super excited about quantum and combining this with AI. I
Yeah.
think this is going to be hugely transformative
Yeah, and I
potentially.
think it's going to be a big focus. And say those type of technologies are now able to do ground truth audit of exactly where the images have come from. So that's definitely one to watch over time and see how
Yeah,
those progress.
we just need the operators to actually implement them
Yeah.
in their social networks. Um, so how do you then bake trust into your systems? How do you create trust by design?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something we really strive to achieve. So at KPMG, we have sorry, what's called a trusted framework, and that trusted framework is effectively around many. I think we've got 10 very strong principles, and some of those are ethical principles. Some of them are more historic sort of privacy principles as well. But all of those risks and principles then lead and link to controls. So the practical sense is you're baking in your control points at every step of that life cycle that I spoke about. And if you're designing any AI solution, that you're taking it right from the start and ensuring that you've got the appropriate controls in place all the way along that journey. So that's what we mean by baking in trusted by design. Um, the old terms used to be off the back of GDPR, privacy by design. Right, so this is now taking it a step further and applying it to AI systems and ensuring that you've built in the appropriate controls that allow you to be trusted. So that will hit both the regulatory standpoint, but also the ethical principles that need to be applied.
Very good. And yeah, I think it's so important to really focus on all parts of a system to bake this in. In your report on trusted AI, you mentioned values-driven AI implementation. So how do you help organizations align AI initiatives with their existing corporate values?
Yeah, absolutely. So the values-driven approach, you're right, it does align to corporate values, and most corporate values will have techniques like or statements like integrity baked into them. They will have social responsibility baked into them as examples. So it's making sure that again, both from a integrity of data or integrity of the models, all the way through to using and ensuring that you're challenging use cases and using AI for good, better good of society, better good of employees, etc. So, and the way you can do that side of it, where I've seen it done very well, we do this to ourselves internally, but equally I've seen this in large GSIBs, so global significant banks, for example, is putting in ethics boards or ethics councils in place, and they're not compliance teams, so they're not there to do the job of say yes or no and tick a box against regulation. They're there as an advisory board, and sometimes a challenge to on the ethical side more than anything. So use cases will go through the board, and they'll be helping challenge whether there's any potential for harm, or challenge against the values of the organizations, as you said, to, what do you really believe in? Does this align to our values? And they'll help with that diversity of thought and baking in that diversity of thought, which we know is incredibly important into the decision making up front before any more formal development and rollout into production environments of these tools. So that's what we meant by aligning to the values and how you can practically set up the constructs to allow that to happen.
Yeah, very interesting. So you mentioned that you're using this yourself, that you have
Yep.
an ethics board. I'd love to know a little bit more about this, how this actually functions, what their role is, who is on the board,
Yeah,
just to
absolutely.
give people a bit
So
more insights into how they could potentially do that.
yeah, absolutely. And the importance of the board, it's a collaboration, and that's the biggest and fundamentally the most important aspect of it. That you need the collective, and this is all about driving that level of diversity of thought. So for example, you'll have everyone from either your general counsel. someone very much focused on the legal aspects of the organisation. Of course, you'll naturally have anyone that sits in a whether it's a DPO type role, but a privacy leads. You'll then have your data leads in attendance, and you have your CRO or equivalent type leads, so your risk. And then you'll have bringing in your head of people, for example, that can really help challenge from
Mm,
the people side. And there'll be others that come along into those boards. I mean, I sit, even though I'm not any of those roles, I sit on our board internally ourselves to again help that challenge. Some organisations purposely have roles of formal roles as AI ethicists that they're starting to recruit into. Or others are forming that. There's another organisation that purposely brings in academics
mm,
into their boards to help challenge. Again, it's all about understanding who's currently on your board, challenge yourselves. Do we have enough diversity? And not just the traditional diversity, but diversity of thought. So it's driven about what could we be missing? Where could we be driving groupthink? So sometimes external presence is a good way to sort of break that initial very corporate groupthink mentality. Um, and challenge in slightly different ways. So that's how we're structured. Equally, of course, below that board, there's a framework of more structured approach to how you manage AI. And interestingly, there's a newer ISO standard. It's just be really technical, but it's ISO 42001 for anyone that's interested. But that ISO standard is the first international standard of management of AI and good management and governance of AI. And our KPMG Australia firm are the first firm in the entire world to be accredited on that standard. So obviously that naturally that's going to go across all of our member firms and hopefully to ourselves in the UK shortly as well. But that helps build that trust. If you think about aligning outside of formal regulations, aligning to global international standards around good management over AI systems and responsible development of AI systems, then that again for us builds trust with both the regulators as well as our customers.
and then this committee or this panel, they review all AI projects, or how do they operate in practice?
The practical aspects is building a library of patterns, so AI patterns, and they could be like technical patterns, but use case patterns as well.
Mm.
And when in the old phrase, something looks like, smells like, something else that's already been done, then the route through is much faster. And so we have a platform. We call it Ava. It's effectively an AI platform or workflow type solution or workbench type solution. It has been approved technically for use. So any solution that we want to build that's built on Ava is already pre-approved outside of some edge cases. For example, if you're suddenly needing to use data around PII or anything else, then of course it has to go through new and separate approvals. But anything quite standard that's using the technologies that have already been tested and approved, you can go off and use. So it's very much taking that risk-based approach and that almost like a catalogue of, say, components. And once you've approved them, then those same patterns can be reused.
Yeah, I love that. So your framework also emphasizes human-centric AI. So in practical terms, how do you measure whether an AI system truly augments rather than replaces human capabilities?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is important, and it's a fine line because there's a lot of discussion at the moment on ROI and how you actually calculate and what metrics you should be using in this space. But on that particular ask, then the easy answer is to say, and it's something we do to ourselves, and that's measurement of very quick, short survey type. And I'm not talking about, oh, yeah, another survey that comes out takes you half an hour to complete. Again, just referring back to some of our own AI platforms we have, it's a quick pop-up that says how much time is this do you think or do you estimate that you're saving by using, for example, Ava today, and it'll be buckets or things that you just select and it disappears away, and off you go, you carry on doing your work on using it to augment your activities. Naturally, there can be wider pulse surveys asking communities how are they using it, but equally not within ourselves, but I've seen a firm who are looking at using AI to augment decision making. So, for example, that could be credit decision making within an organisation, sorry, for their customers, and they can put in checks to look at the percentage. Just say just an example where there's one metric that they're using to look at a percentage of the credit decisions that were generated by AI that have been changed by a human. And if your percentage is within a certain threshold of expectation, then you can say it's augmenting the role because humans are definitely in the loop. Of
Mm.
course, if it's very low and you're not seeing enough changes, then you could start challenging whether you want to turn the phrase, the humans becoming a slave and not doing the human oversight. But there's a fine line. But that's just one metric that you can look at to help capture whether something is truly augmenting rather than automating a solution.
Yeah, I like that. What are some of the most common obstacles then that organizations face when trying to implement these ethical principles across their AI life cycle?
I think the first one is is the framework. So, do you have your ethical principles clearly defined and how you communicate those? Um, and do you have a framework for, like I said, whether it's an ethics board or council type construct in place to support as an advisory to your business? So, I guess it's an element of a framework, then there's an element of a higher level operating model. And then it's going to come back down to education. One of the
Mm,
biggest obstacles is still a lack of education and understanding. So not just to say the blank, do you understand AI, but you've still got to educate people on what your principles are of an organization, what you stand for, how that applies, and are there any new processes people should follow? The biggest barrier is people wanting to do the right thing and just not knowing what they don't know, if that
mm.
makes sense. Um, so those ones, and of course I'm going to say this, but this is definitely true across every organization. Still fundamentally what hinders the acceleration here is the foundational elements, so infrastructure and data, right, and the quality of the data and the access to the data. It still hurts, and certainly the large organization, it still hurts them time and time again. So you really got to focus on getting your data estate well managed itself. So that was still the requirement before AI came along, but it's even more the requirement now that AI is here. You can't be running AI. You mentioned it earlier yourself. Where people are getting frustrated that you're getting the wrong results, it's typically because whether it's a knowledge base, whether it's a SharePoint, a OneDrive, or if you're using Copilots, or if it's wide knowledge bases, are just poor quality information in
Mm.
there.
Yeah, I'd love to look at a practical example. Could you share a success story where implementing these principles helped a client avoid maybe a potential AI ethics crisis?
Gosh, it's a hard one actually, because I guess if it's avoided it, it means they've done a good job. But
Yeah.
it'll be going. I'll just briefly mention it because it's going back to the story of the boards. So we did help a client set up, say, this ethics board, and they did run training. So in my view, they were leading the way and doing things in the right approach. Um, when I caught up with them through some of the longer standing training programs, they were telling some stories that some of these use cases had come in to the board. Um, and what was interesting, they said they were doing the right thing by saying, they're more advisory. So a number of times they would have these use cases coming in. They have frameworks and structures for people to complete justification of doing it. Have you done the following? Yes, and give a description of what you've done in this space, for example. But then they would challenge and identify um, an additional control that they might need to consider to go away and rethink or get in place before they're allowed to go ahead and build these solutions. And what that was effectively doing is turning what they would classify as an amber risk into a green risk. So they're not completely risk adverse, but they need to make sure that they're covering as much basis as possible. There was a couple of cases they did. I'm trying to think what the cases were, though I can't remember at the top of my head. But there was a case that went through that they just were not comfortable in terms of using and rolling out. I think it was related to rolling out across different jurisdiction. And so that was a red. And so they did say, you're going to have to go away and completely rethink. So that's, to my view, that's the board working in the capacity that's effective, because it's helping with those challenges that the teams on the ground weren't picking up on.
Yeah, excellent. So, as we stand at this intersection of powerful AI capabilities and ethical considerations, what do you believe is the most important collective challenge humanity needs to solve to ensure that AI actually benefits society as a whole?
Oh God, that's a big question, isn't it? How do I solve the world? Um, I might have, I don't know if I've got one, I might have two, but I'll say the first one. And the first one I don't have an answer to, so please don't ask me for my solution. I think the first one is the global lens, and we need, in my opinion, um, a level of consistency of standards or regulation across jurisdictions. Um, and at the moment, I think we're possibly going in the other direction. Um, but I think with that divergence and inconsistencies, we're never, as a collective for society, to say for the bigger good of the world, we're not going to achieve what AI can truly achieve. Data doesn't have boundaries, right? So the challenge is AI doesn't have boundaries. Yep, we have boundaries as countries, as leads in countries, and I think that's going to stifle the amount of innovation that can happen, or they will end up being in silos. And I guess that leads me on to, I guess, a second point, um, and that's more where we currently are today, and the leaders in the world on AI today, and they are, I guess, a handful. Yes, obviously we've got the US, we've got China, we've got the UK, for example. And the type of data they're using, if you think about generative AI, which is the internet is very Western. And so already they're not necessarily serving underrepresented countries. So it doesn't serve well African countries, as an example of that. So I think there needs to be more focus on border infrastructure growth. So what I mean by that is data centers and access to data, to enable and make sure that we don't have these smaller countries being far left behind, with these large countries taking the ownership and direction of where AI goes.
Yeah, fascinating. Very challenging. I think we'll have to wait and see whether we achieve this global standard. Hopefully, over time, we will. I think the European Union is making a good start with their AI regulation,
Yeah,
which is risk-based. Will be interesting to see whether this is adopted across the world or similar approaches. Leanne, thank you so much for sharing those really super interesting insights on trust, which is, I think, a key component of any successful AI implementation. So I really appreciate it.
that's okay. Thank you so much for having me.
A pleasure. And for anyone who ever wants to rewatch this conversation, you can simply head to my YouTube channel or any podcast platform where you can listen to this. You can listen to this one as well as hundreds of other conversations on the future of business and technology. Thank you very much and see you soon.
Thank you.